The parking lot behind the bank stayed quiet after midnight. Streetlights hummed softly above rows of sleeping cars. Cold air slid down from the hills and pooled across the asphalt. Winter nights in Ohio often froze everything before sunrise. By 2 in the morning, frost usually crept across every windshield. It spread slowly like pale dust over dark glass. But one car looked different that night. A black sedan sat alone under a humming sodium lamp. Inside, a man leaned back in the driver's seat. His name was Carl, a regional banker everyone trusted. Carl worked late during stressful quarterly reporting weeks. Security cameras showed him leaving the bank around 11. He carried a laptop bag and a half-empty coffee. He unlocked the sedan and sat inside. Then the parking lot cameras saw nothing unusual afterward. No visitors arrived. No doors opened. The temperature kept falling quietly through the night. Moisture in the air began settling on every cold surface. Windshields, mirrors, and metal roofs slowly whitened with frost. Normally, frost grows across the outside surface of the glass. Carl's windshield told a completely different story. Delicate ice ferns bloomed across the inside of the glass. Thin branches curled like miniature frozen forests. They grew inward from the edges toward Carl's still face, and that tiny detail bothered the first officer immediately. Morning commuters discovered the car when sunlight hit the lot. A woman walking toward the bank noticed the driver had not moved. She watched for several seconds. Carl remained perfectly still behind the cloudy windshield. She called the police immediately. Officer Mike arrived, expecting a routine medical emergency. The sedan doors were locked from the inside. The engine was off, and the keys rested beside Carl's hand. Carl looked pale, stiff, and unmistakably dead. Mike circled the car slowly, studying the strange windshield. Ice patterns coated the glass like botanical drawings in a textbook. Every crystal branch pointed inward toward the cabin. Mike wiped a small circle with his glove. The frost vanished instantly, revealing clean glass beneath. But the pattern returned minutes later from the edges. Tiny icy tendrils crept across the interior surface again. Paramedics finally unlocked the door and pulled Carl outside. Cold air spilled from the cabin like breath from a freezer. The interior felt colder than the surrounding morning air. That detail confused everyone standing nearby. Cars usually trap heat during winter nights. Even frozen vehicles stay slightly warmer than outside air. Yet Carl's sedan felt like a refrigerated box. Someone suggested the heater must have failed overnight. Another officer guessed Carl passed out after drinking. But the frost kept quietly growing across the inside glass, and nobody could explain why ice grew inward instead of outward. The county medical office handled cases like this every winter. Hypothermia deaths appear tragic but rarely suspicious. Carl's body temperature supported that simple explanation. The report estimated he died around 3 in the morning. Blood tests showed no poison and almost no alcohol. His heart displayed mild stress, typical for freezing victims. Detective Laura reviewed the file quickly that afternoon. Nothing suggested violence, struggle, or forced entry. The car remained locked through the entire night. Security footage showed nobody approaching the vehicle. Laura paused on the strange windshield photographs. Delicate frost ferns filled the glass like frozen plants. They looked beautiful in an unsettling way. Technicians dismissed them as normal winter condensation. According to them, frost patterns grow in unpredictable directions. Temperature shifts overnight supposedly created decorative ice crystals. Laura accepted the explanation because nothing contradicted it. The death certificate listed accidental hypothermia. Carl's family held a quiet funeral 3 days later. The bank replaced him before the next reporting cycle. The case file slid quietly into a gray cabinet drawer. Officially, the mystery ended there, but one tiny detail refused to stay quiet. Those ice ferns still pointed inward, and physics rarely lies about direction. The city crime lab woke before sunrise every weekday. Most technicians preferred quiet hours before detectives arrived. Evan worked there, usually alone beside humming refrigeration units. His specialty sounded boring until something went wrong. He studied thermal evidence and environmental traces from crime scenes. Condensation, frost, heat marks, and microscopic moisture patterns fascinated him. Water always leaves a story behind. Evan believed temperature behaved like a silent witness. You only needed patience to hear it speak. That morning, he examined a shattered store window from a burglary. Police assumed the glass broke from outside during the night. Evan measured tiny droplets frozen along the inner frame. He photographed them carefully under bright laboratory lamps. The droplets told him something detectives missed. The store heater had been running when the glass shattered. Warm air pushed moisture outward through the crack instantly. That meant the window broke from inside the store. Evan wrote a short note beneath the images. Temperature gradients reveal direction when people cannot. He placed the file on a detective's desk afterward. The detective would probably ignore it anyway. That happened often with environmental evidence. People trusted fingerprints more than physics, but Evan never argued loudly about his conclusions. He simply showed the data and waited patiently. Physics eventually wins every quiet argument. Water vapor always obeys the same rules. 3 days after the funeral, Detective Laura visited the lab. She carried Carl's case folder and several glossy photographs. Evan recognized the frost patterns immediately. They looked wrong in a subtle but stubborn way. Laura explained the official ruling without enthusiasm. Accidental hypothermia inside a locked car overnight. The medical report placed death around 3 in the morning. The detectives had already closed the file, but Laura kept staring at those strange ice ferns. They bothered her instincts in ways paperwork could not explain. She placed the photos under Evan's desk lamp. Every crystal branch leaned toward the interior cabin. Evan frowned quietly while studying the image edges. Frost direction usually reveals airflow and temperature gradients. Inside a parked car, frost rarely grows that way. Laura sighed and leaned against the metal cabinet. Reopening the case would create serious problems. Carl's death already looked like a tragic accident. His family finally started grieving instead of asking questions. If she reopened the investigation, the department would demand proof. Without proof, she would damage reputations for nothing. Evan tapped the photograph thoughtfully with a pen. 2 bad choices sat quietly on the table. Ignore the frost and accept the official timeline, or question the physics and risk everything. Evan finally looked up at Laura. Physics hates comfortable conclusions. Laura exhaled slowly and closed the folder again. "Mind," she said quietly. "Let's check the car one more time." The impound garage smelled like cold metal and motor oil. Carl's sedan waited under fluorescent lights beside wrecked vehicles. Dust covered the hood after several forgotten days. Laura unlocked the door while Evan watched carefully. Cold air still lingered faintly inside the cabin. Evan carried a small thermometer and a portable humidity sensor. He placed them on the dashboard quietly. Then he studied the windshield from the inside surface. The frost had long melted under garage heat, but faint mineral outlines remained across the glass. Tiny branching stains traced the former ice crystals. Evan photographed them from several angles. Crystal growth usually follows airflow and vapor direction. He checked the cabin vents along the dashboard. Most remained closed in the winter position. One vent, however, sat slightly open toward the windshield. That alone meant almost nothing unusual. Cars often circulate small amounts of outside air overnight. Evan then inspected the car's climate control settings. The temperature dial sat at maximum heat, but the engine had never been running. That setting normally changes nothing inside a parked vehicle. Still, Evan crouched beside the passenger seat quietly. He noticed faint frost residue near the lower vent opening. That location made his eyebrows tighten slightly. Frost should appear on the coldest surfaces first. Inside a parked car, that place rarely becomes coldest. Something inside the ventilation system had moved extremely cold air, and parked cars simply do not do that naturally. Carl's office still smelled faintly like fresh coffee and printer ink. Laura unlocked the door with a borrowed key from building security. Evan followed quietly, carrying a small evidence camera. The desk looked ordinary for a regional bank manager. Papers stacked neatly beside a polished laptop stand. Family photos faced the chair with careful symmetry. Carl appeared organized, methodical, and painfully predictable. Laura checked drawers for medication, alcohol, or suspicious notes. Nothing unusual appeared during the first slow search. Evan studied the office thermostat on the far wall. The temperature read 70 degrees, perfectly comfortable for winter workdays. But the vent above Carl's desk caught Evan's attention. A faint white crust clung to its narrow metal grill. He climbed onto the chair to inspect it closely. The residue looked powdery and slightly crystalline. Laura frowned from across the office floor. Office vents collect dust, not frost. Evan scraped a tiny sample onto clear tape. Under the portable lens, the crystals looked oddly familiar. They resembled miniature frost grains after melting. Laura raised an eyebrow without speaking. Carl's office heating system ran normally that evening. Maintenance records confirmed no ventilation failures or repairs. The residue seemed harmless, but strangely misplaced. Cold air rarely forms frost inside heated buildings, especially not above a banker's tidy desk. Evans sealed the sample inside a labeled bag. The vent clue sat quietly beside the car ventilation mystery, 2 pieces of cold evidence. Yet they refused to fit together. That evening, Evan stopped at a roadside diner near the highway. The place smelled like frying onions and burnt coffee. Truck drivers filled the booths after long winter routes. Evan sat alone beside the window with a notebook. He sketched frost patterns from Carl's windshield photographs. Thin branches grew inward from every glass edge. The structure reminded him of botanical leaf veins. A waitress named Kelly refilled his mug casually. She noticed the drawings scattered across the table. "Looks like winter got trapped inside your notebook," she joked. Evan smiled politely without explaining the case. Kelly wiped the foggy diner window beside him. Outside air was bitterly cold that night. Inside, the diner felt warm and humid. Moisture instantly formed soft condensation on the glass. Tiny droplets appeared across the inside surface. Kelly laughed and traced a spiral with her finger. Then something interesting happened before Evan's eyes. The droplets froze slowly near the window edge. Cold air leaked through a thin frame gap. Ice crystals grew inward across the warm glass. Evan leaned closer, suddenly alert. The direction looked exactly like Carl's windshield frost. Kelly shrugged and carried coffee to another table. Evan stared at the window several silent seconds. Warm, humid air met colder glass near the leaking edge. Water vapor deposited ice where temperature dropped first. The pattern always grows toward the warmer region, toward the moisture source inside. Evan suddenly closed the notebook. The lab refrigerator hummed steadily after midnight. Evan worked alone beside the glass testing chamber. Laura watched quietly from the doorway with folded arms. They mounted a spare windshield panel inside the frame. Small sensors measured temperature along the glass edges. Humidity monitors recorded vapor levels inside the chamber. Evan adjusted a narrow airflow duct near the bottom. The setup mimicked a parked car interior. Warm, moist air filled the chamber slowly. Then Evan opened the cold airflow duct carefully. Air chilled to 20 degrees, rushed along the glass surface. The glass cooled unevenly from the bottom edge upward. Laura leaned closer as vapor touched the cold surface. Nothing happened for several quiet seconds. Then frost appeared like pale dust near the lower edge. Thin white crystals formed almost instantly, but the growth direction changed everything. Delicate branches spread inward across the warm glass, exactly like the photographs from Carl's sedan. Laura stepped closer to the chamber window. The frost raced upward faster than expected. Evan increased airflow through the small vent opening. The crystals accelerated dramatically across the glass. Now the windshield filled with intricate ice ferns. Laura studied the pattern silently. The car heater setting still bothered her. A parked engine cannot produce cold airflow. Evan slowly closed the duct valve again. The frost stopped spreading immediately. Only forced airflow could create those rapid patterns. And someone had controlled that airflow deliberately. The lab chamber filled again with warm, humid air. Evan invited Laura closer to the sensors along the glass. Numbers shifted slowly across the small digital displays. Temperature near the lower vent dropped far faster than expected. The glass cooled unevenly along a narrow, invisible path. That uneven cooling created a temperature gradient across the surface. Laura watched frost bloom along the coldest edge. The crystals formed instantly when vapor touched freezing glass, but they did not grow randomly across the panel. They followed invisible heat flow through the surface. Ice crystals always grow toward warmer regions containing more vapor. That direction matters more than most people realize. Evan tapped the sensor graph projected on the laptop screen. The airflow delivered cold air across the windshield interior. Warm breath from a person inside added moisture continuously. That moisture fed the frost growth like invisible fuel. The colder the glass became, the faster deposition occurred. This process is called vapor deposition in basic physics. Water vapor transforms directly into ice without becoming liquid. But the direction of crystal growth reveals the vapor source. In Carl's car, vapor came from the cabin air. The glass cooled first near the lower vent opening. That forced crystals to spread upward across the windshield. Laura nodded slowly while studying the diagram. But frost alone could not explain Carl's death. Evan pointed toward another sensor line on the graph. Cold airflow can also drain body heat rapidly. Moving air removes warmth faster than still air. That process accelerates hypothermia dramatically inside confined spaces. Carl's car became a freezing chamber through the ventilation system. Someone forced cold air through the vents overnight. That same airflow created the misleading frost patterns. The crystals disguised the true timeline of freezing. Laura finally understood the quiet trick behind the scene. Laura spread the photographs across the metal table again. Each image now looked different after the lab experiment. The frost patterns revealed a timeline hidden inside physics. Carl entered the sedan around 11 that night. Security cameras confirmed he remained inside afterward. The heater setting stayed on maximum heat position, but the engine never started during those hours. Someone tampered with the ventilation system remotely. Cold air flowed through the lower vent beneath the windshield. The glass cooled rapidly from the bottom upward. Carl likely noticed the cold only gradually. The car remained sealed and locked from inside. Moving air stripped warmth from his body continuously. Hypothermia crept closer with every passing minute. Meanwhile, moisture from Carl's breathing filled the cabin. That moisture fed frost growth across the glass interior. The crystals spread slowly during the freezing process. But something else complicated the timeline investigators believed. Evan pointed to a photo taken early that morning. The frost looked dense and fully developed there. Yet the lab model produced that pattern much faster. Strong airflow accelerated crystal growth dramatically. Those ferns could appear within 30 minutes under forced ventilation. That meant Carl might have died much earlier than estimated. The frost disguised the true time of death completely. Laura leaned back while considering the implication. Someone engineered both the cold and the misleading evidence. The crime looked like a quiet winter accident, but it was carefully designed physics. Laura requested Carl's recent workplace records the next morning. Financial pressure often hides behind sudden, unexplained deaths. The bank's internal files revealed several tense meetings recently. Carl had blocked a risky investment proposal from another executive. That proposal came from a man named Dennis. Dennis handled regional infrastructure loans for the bank. Carl refused to approve Dennis' project 2 weeks earlier. The disagreement nearly exploded during a board meeting. Witnesses described Dennis as unusually angry afterward. Laura checked Dennis' background for mechanical experience. His previous job surprised everyone reviewing the record. Dennis once worked for a commercial HVAC installation company. He understood ventilation systems better than most bankers. Evan compared the office vent residue with lab samples. The crystals matched frost from compressed refrigerant airflow. Dennis' office shared the same building ventilation network. Carl's desk vent residue suggested earlier testing of cold airflow. Dennis could have experimented inside the building safely. Later, he only needed access to Carl's parked sedan. Modern cars allow ventilation control through simple mechanical adjustments. A hidden duct connection could channel outside winter air inward. Cold air would flow continuously without running the engine. Carl would slowly freeze inside the sealed vehicle. The frost would grow naturally and confuse investigators. Laura studied Dennis' photo beside the evidence board. His knowledge matched the crime perfectly. His motive matched even better, and physics quietly pointed straight at him. Laura expected a personal grudge or desperate financial motive. The deeper audit revealed something much larger instead. Carl had blocked more than a single investment project. He stopped an entire chain of infrastructure loans. Those loans funded new refrigerated storage facilities across several states. The deals looked profitable on the surface, but internal notes showed unusual engineering costs hidden in contracts. Carl suspected equipment installations that made no financial sense. Ventilation systems appeared oversized for the listed buildings. Evan examined the construction specifications late that night. The airflow capacity exceeded normal industrial cooling requirements dramatically. Someone designed those systems for extreme temperature drops, far beyond normal food storage conditions. Laura cross-checked the companies receiving those loans. Several belonged to shell corporations connected quietly through Dennis. If the loans passed approval, millions would move through those companies. Carl discovered the pattern just days before his death. The board meeting transcripts confirmed his objections clearly. He planned to open a formal fraud investigation inside the bank. That action would expose the entire network quickly. Dennis stood to lose far more than reputation. He would lose millions hidden inside those construction deals. Evan leaned back from the glowing spreadsheet quietly. Dennis built ventilation systems capable of controlled freezing. He tested them first inside Carl's office building. Then he used the same idea inside the sedan. One murder disguised as an accident. But the infrastructure behind it was enormous. Laura stared at the numbers spreading across the screen. Carl had uncovered a financial iceberg beneath ordinary contracts, and someone tried burying that discovery under frost. Dennis arrived calmly at the police station that afternoon. He wore an expensive gray coat and an unreadable smile. Laura invited him into the interrogation room without ceremony. Evan placed several photographs on the metal table quietly. Dennis glanced at them with polite curiosity. Windshield frost patterns rarely interest bankers. Laura began explaining explaining the ventilation experiment slowly. Dennis listened without interrupting or showing surprise. Evan opened his laptop beside the photographs. Graphs from the laboratory test filled the screen. Temperature gradients traced the frost growth direction precisely. Only forced cold airflow could create that pattern inside glass. Laura slid the office vent residue report across the table. The crystalline structure matched refrigerant airflow from HVAC compressors. Dennis' previous career appeared in the employment records beside it. Laura described Carl's objections during the board meeting. Dennis folded his hands calmly and leaned back. "People freeze in cars every winter," he said quietly. Laura nodded and pushed one final photo forward. The image showed Carl's lower windshield vent clearly. A thin, external tube mark appeared beside the intake opening. Investigators discovered the same tube inside Dennis' garage. It connected easily to portable refrigerant compressors. Dennis studied the photograph longer this time. His calm expression tightened for a brief second. Evan watched that reaction carefully. Physics rarely shouts inside interrogation rooms, but sometimes it whispers loudly enough. The parking lot behind the bank still looked ordinary today. Cars arrived each morning beneath the same humming streetlights. Most drivers never noticed the quiet science surrounding them. Cold air still pooled across the asphalt after midnight. Frost still formed on glass during winter mornings. But now Laura saw the scene differently. She remembered the inward-growing ice ferns on Carl's windshield. Those delicate patterns once looked like random winter decoration. In reality, they carried a hidden message. Ice crystals record temperature history like tiny frozen compasses. They grow toward warmth and away from the coldest surface. That simple rule revealed the entire crime. The frost proved cold air entered from the vent first. It proved moisture came from Carl breathing inside the cabin. It proved airflow accelerated the freezing process dramatically. And it proved the official timeline could not be correct. Water vapor followed physics even when people lied. Laura paused beside the empty parking space quietly. The night air already felt colder again. Somewhere moisture prepared to freeze across nearby windshields. Most of those patterns would remain meaningless winter art. But one pattern solved a murder disguised as weather. All because ice crystals always point toward the truth. So next time frost creeps across your windshield overnight, look closely. Which direction are those tiny frozen branches growing?